the other thing the clowns in Congress just did, including quite a few Democrats, in fact, the majority of the Democrats, is they mobilized to vote for a concurrent resolution to speak out against the most pressing problem facing America today, which, you guessed it, is also socialism. So this is the concurrent resolution. Concurrent resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism. And I just thought, it's all right. I have a socialist economist who writes books about this stuff here. Let's just before we get into the debate, I want to talk a little bit about Congress's analysis of the horrors of socialism. Just for context, every single Republican, no exceptions in the House. There are 3 who I think didn't show up for the vote, but every single one who showed up and voted cast a yay vote for this concurrent resolution, 100% unanimity. Democrats, there were 86 nay votes, 14 cowards who voted present, and then 110, I think, something like that. 100 and something yay votes, right? So there was a clear majority of Democrats who voted for this shit too, including, I would note, a couple of ones that are actually like most of these, like, look, Hakeem Jeffries votes or something like this. It's not it would have to be surprising in some way to be disappointed, or out of character, or out of step with the concerns of his donors or anything like that. But like Ro Khanna voted for this shit, who was, is actually, he's a mixed bag, and and I think he does, I mean, in certain respects, sometimes I think he is kind of, Ro Khanna D Silicon Valley, but I do think that, but on the other hand, I think he is an above average Democrat in many ways, certainly a strong supporter of Medicare for all, has better than average positions on tech censorship and on, de-escalating superpower tensions so we don't do World War III, and was in fact a big supporter of Bernie Sanders. And I mean, he was the chair of it's an honorary role, but still, of Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2020, and he voted for this. And I want to tell you about his excuse for that in a moment, but first I want to just look through this. So, whereas socialist ideology necessitates a concentration of power that has time and time collapsed into communist regimes, totalitarian rule, and brutal dictatorships. All right, fact check. Professor Larson, what do we think about this?
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Thank God I arrived just in time to learn about this friggin' disgrace. This is pretty rich, obviously, so, I'm just learning about this right now for the first time. It's actually true. This is great, though. So bear in mind, this is a country that everyone agrees is the most capitalist in the world that's had a falling lifespan for 8 years. Falling, not standard of living, which has been flatlining or falling for like most of my lifetime. Jesus, like this is just falling span of your godforsaken scratching for healthcare money, American life. Okay. And the first thing it mentions here, yes, thank you, Ben. Socialism necessitates a concentration of power. Concentration of power. Here's a fun exercise. I'm going to read to you a little headline from the Wall Street Journal today. This is today. This is from this morning. The bosses are back in charge. CEOs are reasserting their authority now that workers are starting to worry about job security amid rising layoffs. Quote, this whole concept of working from anywhere went too far. And it describes here how, quote, America's bosses are starting to feel bossy again. And it shows very clearly, like toward the top of the article, companies and sectors doing big layoffs, you see, that are happening, reflecting that, they're feeling, CEOs are feeling more in charge because more people are getting fired. The job market's weakening. My colleagues will tell you, of course, that labor markets are efficient because you go to the work where you're most marginally productive, and that's how your compensation will be determined. But right here, I'm learning that as soon as the job market softens, yes, executives are feeling very much back in the saddle. Yes, everyone's talking about yanking away the generous working from home benefits. Several CEOs referring to this. The balance of power in the labor market shifted toward workers. This is so confusing because I'm seeing right here that socialism necessitates a concentration of power. And here on the front page of the highest circulation newspaper in America, very conservative, owned by the Fox News billionaire Rupert Murdoch, boss is back in charge. So who's in charge? Who has power? It's just confusing. I can't draw any conclusion from this. I'm just confused. Yeah. So, but obviously, thank you, thank you, Leader McCarthy, for, making sure that the system that has a shrinking lifespan and CEOs are in charge, according to themselves, is safe from concentration of power, which that sounds like a
fucking definitely can't have concentrated power. That would be terrible. Which, I mean, you wrote a book about monopolistic practices of tech companies, and I'd also just point out, I mean, if you're, I'd be interested to know, okay, so what's the opposite of concentrated power, right? I mean, like if you're talking about diffused power, lots of people having power, then if you have a system, like, I mean, I'll just go to my go-to example. This, like, if Amazon was a worker-owned cooperative, then it might not have totally flat wage scales, because you could still, even if everybody got to vote on this stuff, some kind of operating agreement, you might convince people that some people needed to earn a little bit more than others for one reason or another, that if some people were doing particularly, demanding jobs with lots of stress and responsibility, or they had rare skills that, and you really needed to entice them in to recruit them, that you'd have to offer them a little bit more than everybody else. Conversely, you might actually have to offer people more if they're doing particularly dangerous or unpleasant jobs, in order to entice them to do it. But I don't know. I kind of think if you were like, hey, this whole thing was Jeff's idea originally, so I actually think we should just vote to give him so much more than the rest of us that he will actually have like the take-home income to buy his own spaceship. I don't know. I don't think you're going to win that vote. And I think that tells me something about, concentrated power versus diffuse power. Do you have one person who's in a position to just decide how the pie is divided up, or is this decision diffused among a lot of people?
Yeah, I mean, that would seem to be the issue here. But, right away, it's, well, you don't want economic power. We have free markets. It's free markets. This is power. Like, I think you're overthinking this, Ben. I think you and I really struggle with this on this show. We overthink things a lot. Again, let's focus on the surface level here. Yeah, there's no discussion of exactly what a dispersed power landscape would look like. I mean, you have your classic American pre-capitalism from the early 1800s, so lots of little smallholders and stuff. I mean, that was the early ideal. But even then, the moment you have industry, you have these railroads that are just holding every farmer and rancher by the nuts. Like, the moment you get big scale industry, you invite these giant concentrations of power, totally irrespective of all like the feudal ones in Europe and the slave aristocracy in America who were there at the beginning of it. Of course, like it's a short-lived tale.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that going back to an economy where everybody, you can have private ownership of the means of production, but still have super dispersed power because everybody is like, a subsistence farmer, or, maybe a like small shopkeeper or something. And like, if you work as an employee for a little while for one of those, then, that before you know it, you'll have your own place, whatever. I think for a variety of reasons, that's pretty wildly unrealistic for a complex, high-tech modern economy, that you could have it be organized that way. But also, even putting that aside, I mean, like, what? I want to know what kind of aggressive trust busted, Speaker McCarthy would be willing to support to at least take us a couple of inches back in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, like always all I ever think about when I look at this stuff is like this is just pitching directly to like the right wing media, landscape, and it's just like this stuff continuously. Like I don't
Yeah.
know, I gotta say they never get tired of the hits there. Maybe that's the key to
Yeah,
this.
yeah. Look, you go to
They hate it when their band comes and plays the new album. They want
oh
the
god, yeah,
classic.
the most dreaded phrase in a now something from the new album, then
Ugh, you get booed off the stage of Fox News with that shit.
yeah, exactly. Look, you go to a Skinner concert because you want to hear Freebird. Like that's you go to Republican congressional resolution because you want to hear about the 100 million people who were killed by
Yeah,
communism. But I
exactly. If we allow the government to negotiate prices for Medicare purchases of pharmaceuticals, tomorrow Joseph Stalin will come into your home and take away your record player.
no exactly, and I like HG's point about the dictator of Sweden because there is this interesting phrase here. Uh, a concentration socialist ideology necessitates a concentration of power that has time and time again collapsed into communist regimes. So
Wow.
I don't know how to read that except as a historical claim that democratic socialist governments have time and time again collapsed into totalitarian capital C communist dictatorships. And I've got to say, I'd be fascinated to hear what the list is of the times that happened. Like they say,
Yeah,
time
it
and
doesn't
time
stop
again,
with
right? So
Weimar
that's like
Republic.
more than once, right?
Yeah, I don't think that list would stop with the Weimar Republic. Yeah, it's
I mean, yeah,
that's
there's no you could maybe say, that certainly when the Bolsheviks came to power, there was some kind of I mean, depending on whether you sort of go with the anarchist or the Trotskyist version of this history, right? There was an aspiration, or at least a claim to an aspiration, or whatever. However, you come down on that to to something more democratic than what they ended up with. But that would be one, right? Like, it's not it's not like it's not like Mao came to power saying we're going to do democratic socialism, right? And then like somehow it just evolved into into something more like the Soviet model. I mean, came to power as somebody who spent decades as a supporter of that model very explicitly. Like it just this claim always drives me crazy because it's just like I don't know. I know I'm being like a weird pedantic nerd about this, but like literally this just didn't happen.
Yeah, it's real frustrating, And there are cases, like I mean, look at like Spain, the Civil War. I mean, you have a big, very legitimately socialist, indeed, kind of actually communist part of the eastern portion of the country that Orwell wrote about, and next, it's conquered by fascism. I mean, the real criticism of socialism is it's vulnerable to whoever's next door stomping on its beautiful premises the moment people get too free for their britches. I mean, that's the real criticism to make.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are real examples
by bastards.
Democratic socialist governments collapsing into dictatorships, but not communist dictatorships, right? I mean, like we've been talking, like you said, about you kind of mentioned Weimar, and I mean, I could maybe not exactly that, but like but like Chile, right? That's a nice example of that, but not what they seem to mean. Okay, so there's some stuff. There's some the Black Book of Communism numbers that are I mean, it's sort of distasteful to be to like review somebody's math as they're running down historical atrocities, but it's also I think not a very serious number. There's fact I think I want to give credit where credit is due. There's a if you follow this Twitter account, that Soak Done Left, they had a good Substack piece about how all of these sort of victims of such and such system, whichever direction it is, like graphics that you see, always like in the rare examples where they bother citing sources, it's always like terrible methodology that like mixes together all kinds of different causes of death, and it doesn't. It just ends up with unhelpful hyperbole. But I want to skip to whereas many of the greatest crimes in history were committed by socialist ideologues, including Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Fidel Castro, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un. That's interesting. That North Korea is the only one that gets multiple. Is the only one besides the Soviet Union that. Oh no, Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro.
And Maduro, yeah, they're willing to recognize the legacy acts,
which is also just funny because there is like, I think this really shows how broad a brush they're painting with here, because if you actually know anything about Venezuela, there's it's like a left government that came under severe attack, ended up doing a lot of things that there's plenty of room for criticizing, no doubt whatsoever about that. But like also, like, that's not a communist country in any normal sense. I mean, like, even at the height of Chavez's welfare state, before they started doing austerity, like they had a public sector that, like, as a proportion of employment in the overall economy, was bigger than the US, but it was smaller than France.
Indeed. And we're always talking about much, much, much poorer countries in the first place, most of which got exploited by us and or the Europeans for centuries on end. The moment they become leftists, all their fucked up problems become socialism's responsibility. So, I mean, it's Amartya Sen did the definitive, in my mind, refutation to these kind of numbers. The great Indian economist, Nobelist, as I recall, nowhere near a socialist himself, technocratic social democrat sort of type, I suppose. But he made the point that during the colonial period, like India, we would have famines all the time as Britain raked off agricultural exports and used them to feed armies, including during World War II when India had this horrible famine because it was fighting Britain's wars. And since independence and its, Cold War, India had some social democratic stripes. It's kind of a back and forth with a lot of these states. But these famines stopped. Like, he made the point that just prioritizing the basic welfare of the citizens of these countries is one of these things that we consider to be socialist. And suddenly we care about these millions of people who are killed. Whereas, like, you can't find a historian who can name how many millions of people got killed under our colonies and under IMF austerity to this day. I mean, these countries are in debt to our richest and Europe's richest citizens, and they export money way in excess of what they get in aid. And we're the ones who are the next on millions of people today, just to put the flip side actual context of this bullshit in view.
Yeah, no, exactly. I also, like somebody pointed out in the chat, it's kind of funny that they left Ho Chi Minh out of the list of communist tyrants.
Yeah, that's an oversight right there.
Maybe it's just awkward, brings up bad memories to mention them.
Yeah. There's no need for us to mention that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot here about the crimes of Stalin and Mao. Would just briefly note that, given that very obviously the actual target of this is like Bernie Sanders, the squad, like the whole point of a resolution like this is to isolate the few politicians in Congress who would call themselves democratic socialists and sort of embarrass and divide Democrats by getting them all to either condemn those people, like condemn the label used by those people, or be lumped together with them. So given that, it's like spending all this time on the crimes of Stalin and Mao is like, it's like, okay, what do you think the point of that D in the DSA was, right, when they founded the organization? Like why is it that you suppose that, like, Bernie Sanders says democratic socialism? What might you think he's trying to differentiate it from? But I do just want to point out, because this is a particularly amazing inclusion here, whereas the socialist experiment in Cambodia led to the killing fields in which over 1 million people were gruesomely murdered, that would, like, if we're talking about crimes that were committed by the Cold War, there are plenty to go around by various sides, but that one goes in our column. Like,
yeah, people aren't aware that before 1975, we spent 5 years bombing, just completely obliterating Cambodia, large parts of which were semi-Neolithic societies that were not part of, like, French Indochina colonial systems. Unbelievable. That goes on for 5 years and destroys their society and creates all their support for weird freak splinter groups like the Khmer Rouge that are taking power, like, all over the place. When you look at these margins, these horrible marginal entities that take over revolutions, it's usually because the Western countries or someone else is stabbing a country continuously that's going through a revolution or civil war. And that hurts, people who have moderate views that appeal to people. It militarizes everything, puts everything in all the power in the hands of everyone who's willing to get a gang up with rifles who can actually just make things happen, whether they're democratic or not. Like this is that one's just like flatly in our column though. Yeah, that's just like a bookkeeping error. Put that shit
exactly.
on the website, bro.
And really to like underline and circle that, it's not even just that the United States, that like that never would have happened if the United States hadn't destroyed that society in the first place, although that's certainly true. I mean, like I remember the instructions that Henry Kissinger infamously passed on from Richard Nixon to the Joint Chiefs of Staff: anything that flies on anything that moves. But also, like, I don't know. I mean, I've been rereading Manufacturing Consent to write something for Jacobin about it, and
that's great.
Yeah, it's a good book. But there's something they get into in there. I mean, like, this is not a conspiracy theory or a secret. Like, the United States supported the Khmer Rouge as an anti-Soviet and anti-Vietnamese thing because when Vietnam invaded the Cambodia precisely to stop the killing fields, the U.S. working through Thailand, like, actually propped up the Khmer Rouge to sort of create an ongoing headache, for Vietnam and the Soviet Union. And like, again, this is not a claim of secret knowledge or something. There are like UN votes that you can point to where
it's all on the record, man. It's all on the record, Mr. McCarthy.
Yeah, I mean, the United States had voted to give the Khmer Rouge Cambodia's UN seat rather than the pro-Vietnamese government. So yeah,
all right. If you're
going
to have your sham condemnation of really positive economic ideas, that's fine, but don't just like openly fuck it up. And remember, Stalin dropped atomic weapons on Japan. Like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we got some stuff about North Korea, but then this is another one of my favorite parts. Whereas the Castro regime in Cuba expropriated the land of Cuban farmers and the businesses of Cuban entrepreneurs, stealing their possessions and their livelihoods, which, like, literally, like, man, there've got to be more real horrors than this. Like, are you counting as a horror the fact that in this, like, brutally unequal society that existed in Cuba before the revolution, that people who owned these like hyper exploitive sugar plantations got their land taken away from them? That's one of the horrors of socialism. So that they redistributed the wealth held by Gusanos and like the mafia and all, like all the people. Basically, if you think about the scene in Godfather 2 in Cuba, right, that like all of those people's wealth going to provide things like healthcare and education, like that's one of the horrors of socialism.
God, it makes your skin crawl. I love this too. Yeah, specifically these exile Cubans exiling millions with nothing but the clothes on their backs and all the money in their American bank accounts, which I imagine they would have because many, many decades it was a client state of the United States. People would go there to their honeymoons and shit. These people have money and they were able to pull a lot of their assets out. I got to say real fast, thank you, commenter, physics PhD, for remembering the point that I fucking mangled earlier. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's you should be up here.
Yeah. Amartya Sen quote from the comment is India seems to manage to fill its cupboards with more skeletons every 8 years than China put there in its years of shame. And it's like, look, I mean, if we're talking about obviously different waves of emigration from Cuba at different times happened for different reasons, like lots of people who, took off for Miami in like the 90s were just like economic migrants, but like if you're talking about the people who were explicitly referenced earlier there, the farmers and entrepreneurs, right? Like, and I think when we say farmers, if you're thinking about Ma and Pa Kent, the Cuban countryside, like, adjust your image of the kind of farms we're talking about in a lot of these cases. But those in many cases we're not leaving with this, with the clothes on their backs, and also, again, I just like whatever legitimate criticisms you can make of Cuba and its system. I mean, like the fact that in a like really like like the Batista dictatorship, when it was no more democratic, than it is now. But things were run much more to the liking of the United Fruit Company and the CIA and the mafia. That they took away the hoarded wealth of elites at that time and used it to provide for the material needs of the people on the island. I mean, that's surely the best thing about Cuba, right? I mean, like, that goes in the list of horrors.
Yeah, indeed. And additionally, I wanted to mention this earlier, just referring back to Venezuela too. Like, Chavez is a very different beast from Maduro. Like, Chavez conformed to electoral results and lost referenda and went, all right, you're making a mistake, but broadly accepted their outcomes. Like, he was reelected overwhelmingly several times. I always love this stuff. Like, we declare you to be a dictator, so you were. And then, we lock a country out of the financial system and try to overthrow it a couple times and encircle it with military bases, like Cuba or Venezuela, and fucking shock, they come out as like fucking hyper-authoritarian. That's what you do when you surround a country with, attacks and threats and blockade it. It would be weird if some strong man didn't end up in charge. Like, people want that when they're under attack and siege. They want someone to be in charge. Like, we encourage all that shit with our policies toward these countries every fucking day that we threaten them. And, we say, like, all options are on the table with Iran. Like, that's a war crime. That's a threat of aggression right there. Every part of this that's bad by these regimes, we inflame and aggravate with our nonstop dick swinging hawkish bullshit.
Totally. And yeah, as you say, I mean, Chavez did win, re-election and survive recall referendums in internationally supervised, free and fair elections. That's, I mean, like, really, I mean, yes, I mean, a lot of much more objectionable stuff has happened since, which is not to say that, I mean, you can, walk and chew bubblegum on this, right? They have you can think that there's, like, grounds for criticizing, the Venezuelan government, for violating various important norms, but also think that we should, leave those people the fuck alone and not try to dictate who their president is from the United States. But
I do love that. Yeah, we declare him your president. That's a great move. Like, more of us should be declaring other people. More of us should declare people in charge of other people. Like, that's I think we're missing a comedy opportunity by not doing that.
Totally. Actually, I was just looking at my Facebook memory the other day. Was right when that happened. I responded by declaring on my private social media that I was recognizing Jeremy Corbyn as the Prime Minister of the UK and calling on all parties to abide by my decision, and that all options were on the table to enforce this.
Yeah, all options.
Which, okay, granted, that didn't work. It was no more successful than the Guaido.
Well, Ben,
it was
exactly.
Less successful.
Exactly. It was no more of a failure than what we did with Guaido. Like, you can at least, it was a success? Perhaps not, but we took a stand. Yeah, Ben, exactly. I really admire you, Ben, for how brave you were in taking that stand.
Yeah, exactly. Very brave.
I'm going to write an op-ed for the Washington Post about it because we're very brave.
All right, now we're done with the horrors of socialism, and we've got the general principles that are being appealed to. Whereas the author of the Declaration of Independence, President Thomas Jefferson, wrote, by the way, it's weird to, like, you can't just say Thomas Jefferson. Like, people don't know who that, I guess not. To take from one, because it is thought that his own industry and that of his fathers has acquired too much in order to spare the others, who or whose fathers have not exercised industry and skill, is to violate arbitrarily the first principle of association, the guarantee to everyone a free exercise of his industry and the fruits acquired by it.
That's good. It still kind of amazes me that we're still referring back to these guys for, like, let me remind you that the incredibly blameless early presidents of the United States had these nice sounding things. I mean, these guys, like, owned and sold people who they could have sex with without their consent, and we're supposed to still be very impressed at what they said about this stuff. Like, it just kind of amazed me. But my favorite part, of course, and this is the only thing I've ever had to say about these guys in print, is just, if you go back to, like, their, very well documented and recorded correspondence, it's kind of amazing the things they would say about, the system they were setting up in the U.S. and about how it was devised to protect property against the majority, and how like the main source of divisions in society were caused by their access to property. I mean, that's in a letter between Madison and Jefferson. The actual record of these assholes is amazing. So, people when people slow the conversation down to a slow bore by bringing up the founding fathers, remind them of the founding fathers' own saucy anti-capitalist remarks from their sunset early industrial revolution years.
Yeah, I mean, this is just like, I mean, it's worth noting that this is a really, really extreme libertarian principle here. That you can't take away anything from one, right, to help another. I mean, that's not just like don't set up a communist dictatorship. That's I mean that's like don't have public schools and social security and disability and payments and all that stuff, right? Like is taken seriously. Say, oh, well, you should have tried harder, with your industry. Same thing with the quote from Madison. Just below that, to explain who James Madison is. It's not just not a just government, nor is it property secure under it, where property which man has in his personal safety and personal liberty is violated by arbitrary seizures of one class of citizens for the service of the next. And it's like, okay, I mean, one, I don't know why, like, super extreme ideologically inflexible libertarian principles are supposed to be more appealing because 18th century slaveholders endorsed them.
Yeah, I do. I gotta say, the vibe I'm getting though, like you're commenting on how they're like, and President James Madison, like they can just go, and remember, let's us always remember that Madison said this, like and everyone would understand it. There's something about this President James Madison, it really has a high school report feel to it. And President James Madison, the third president, he was from the state of Delaware, and he wrote this. Like it just has a little, I feel like they were padding the word count on this bill. I think their teacher said it had to be 180 words, and they were like stretching it out.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's, I don't know. I mean, I'm writing something for the Daily Beast about this, but I mean, my hot take here is that, like, none of this exactly reeks of ideological self-confidence to me. Like, if they want to, I mean, the obvious point of all of it, right? It's like nobody's worried that there's going to be, like nobody's worried that the United States is about to become a Stalinist dictatorship, right? That's not on the cards. Like the people they're attacking are like democratic socialists who are pushing, an extremely minimal program of.
I mean, these are glorified New Deal liberals, barely more than that. I mean, I don't know. That's I wouldn't quite put them in that.
But I mean, like whatever. Pretty mild like however exactly you classify people. Yeah. I think at least in Sanders' case, I mean, he does come from a socialist background, and I think he ultimately dreams bigger or whatever. But like, it's still the point is just that it's like the things that are being pushed at this particular historical junction in the United States are pretty modest, and I think they're showing their hands with the Jefferson and Madison stuff at the end, right? Because it's like this isn't like don't set up a Stalinist dictatorship stuff. This is you can't give everybody health care because that would be seizing the property of one class of citizens to, benefit the rest or whatever. And it's like, okay, but if you were really confident about that, just say that, right? Make your case, man. I don't know why we need to like meander through, the Russian Revolution and Venezuela and Pol Pot and, the quotes from the founding fathers. I mean, like this all just kind of sounds like, if anything, somebody like played the hits to themselves in like an increasing, with an increasing lack of confidence that they're actually in a landscape that like they just need to whisper the word socialism and everybody will fall into line, which I have to say, like, if anything,
only half of them fell into line, Ben. So
I mean,
only half of them did. So
I mean, imagine that there had been a House resolution to condemn socialism 10 years ago, it would have been 100% of them.
Indeed. I'm actually surprised how much it split the party. If, yeah, being totally honest, that was the first headline. It was like Fox News splits the Democrats. I'm like, really? Tell
Yeah,
me more
exactly.
about splitting the Democrats. That's it's incredible. It's true. Like, this is their condemnation of socialism, like at the beginning of their new Republican term. Now that they've picked a leader after 6 trillion votes, it should be more fiery. This is stale. I agree. Like, there's not like a lot of fire of, like, there's no like Jesuit reactionary fire in this. It's nothing. It's all just stale, repeated shit from Glenn Beck's TV show and half remembered talk radio shit. Whatever congressional 20-year-old staffer wrote this, did their best, I'm sure. But,
Yeah.
you think that, like, one of these freaking reactionaries would be really dying to put pen to paper on this and do it. Like, this is copy pasted from the Tuttle Twins website. There's just nothing here. Disappointing. Disappointing. Do better, McCarthy. That's what I say.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want to be our socialist nemesis, you're gonna have to try harder than that.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.